I want to now introduce our friends from IAS who have a session called Setting the Course for Context. And IAS has been a great partner for us this whole year, and really looking forward to continuing to work with them. Chance Johnson, who's the CRO, is going to come up, and he's going to introduce Pam from American Express. Chance, come on up.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pam, why don't you join us up here?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks to the 614 group for having us. We're excited to talk about this. One is, for one reason, it's core to our business, but it's also a really important topic that we really do feel like impacts a lot of us, not just in this room, but around the world. My name is Chance. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at IAS. I'm sure a lot of the folks in the room and watching are familiar, but if not, we're a global leader in digital ad verification, right? We make sure ads are seen by real people in brand safe environments. And up until very recently, brand safety was a binary concept. Something either was safe or it wasn't. But thanks to a lot of the effort and support from the industry, a lot of those people in this room and watching today, we've changed that, I'm proud to say. And we've accepted that brand suitability is the way forward. And with that in mind, we've developed technology and tools that allow marketers like Pam from American Express to go beyond verification and have greater control over the environments in which their ads are seen. And marketers are using these tools to incorporate their beliefs and their values into their advertising. That's something that's really important, and it's something that's very different. Marketers are leaning into, like you hear in a second, topics and conversations that they've typically shied away from. These are topics that impact all of us as a society. These are topics that affect social justice, Black Lives Matter, and the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. The best part about all of this that we're going to be talking about is not only are brands around the world like American Express doing the right thing and probably sleeping better at night because of it, but they're driving better business outcomes. It's positively impacting the bottom line. There's tons of research, but Forbes recently put out that a customer or a consumer is 4 to 6 times more likely to do business with a brand that is purpose-driven. Right? They use words like responsible and trust when talking about brands that are purpose-led. There's very few brands in the world that are leaning into this more than American Express, so I'm very excited to be joined by Pam Ariyakulkan from American Express. Don't worry, I asked in advance, that is how you pronounce her last name. So thanks so much for being here, Pam, and talking about this important topic.
Thank you for having me, Chance, and the 614 group too. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for listening to my monologue. So people really just want to hear from you. So why don't you start at the top? What are some of the big priorities, the big rocks for American Express going into next year?
Yeah, well, one thing that I should start by saying is that our colleagues, our customers, our community is the heart of everything that we do. It's our North Star. So all of our priorities are centered around that. That means making sure that we create value to our card members. And when I say customers, that's also not just the card members. It's our small businesses, right? Our corporations. We also think about how we create value for the communities. So you probably have seen in our news a lot of work has been done around supporting small businesses. Even this year, we had launched business checking to enhance the value for businesses as well. So there's a lot of thought about creating this value. But I would say that small businesses particularly is something that we've been focusing on for years. I'm proud to say that when we launched Off Small, it was since 2010 out of the recession, which is born out of that idea. And last year, it was quite tough for everybody, but especially when we think about small businesses. And so when we think about purpose too, how can we back small businesses and community? And so we're going to see a lot of that throughout years to come. Sure, we actually pledge that we'll be planning to have at least about $100 billion in spending that we anticipate from consumers born out of this, and over the next 5 years, which is huge. And then even last year, we sponsored and partnered with the I Fund Women of Color to support female entrepreneurs. So that, those are just examples of just like where we are going and what we've been doing, and we're going to continue to do that.
That's it's so great to hear, and I think it's probably a call to action for a lot of the brands in the room and brands listening around the world to do the same thing. And I guess the question that we have is, how are you reaching these customers? We know you're using context of a page to make sure that the emotion and sentiment that you're reaching them clicks and it actually makes sense and it feels organic, right?
Yeah. So I would also say, that we lean into the emerged channels. I say emerged because everyone's talking CTV as emerging. It's here, it's been around, and we've been in that space for a while now, testing and learning, likewise in the audio space, in addition to the web as well. And we are finding them through that context. I would say that, what's interesting that we're learning too is that our card members and also our prospects are also younger now, right? Our chairman, CEO, Steve Squeary, had mentioned that a lot of our growth is coming in from millennials and Gen Z, to no surprise, and also our customers, of course. And that's where they are. So as we think about how to find them, and in terms of context, it's going to be a lot in those spaces.
Yeah. So, and I did mention that we've experienced a massive shift as a business. What does contextual relevance mean to you being Amex, but also how do you feel like it's different from brand safety?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say this, that to me, the context means not just having the right message in the right place. It's about considering the right mindset that the consumer is in, or the business owner, right? It's not just about that when you're thinking about your small business. It's about what is your state of mind, and I think about that from like last year, right? We're all consumers. I'm also come from a family of small business owners, lots of entrepreneurs, and can really empathize with the challenges that are going on. And you're in the middle thinking about how do you care for your community, how do you care for your family, and you might not be in that mindset right now to hear from a brand unless you have they have something good to say or something that's of value to say, not just pushing a card or pushing some other type of product.
Yeah. It brings up another question. Obviously, American Express, Fortune 100, been in business for over 150 years.
170.
170. Like this is a top-down initiative all the way. You mentioned it in your earnings call with the CEO. But this focus on small business, as big as you are and as wide as your reach is, how are you using these tools to actually have a meaningful connection with the audience where it feels natural and it doesn't feel forced?
Yeah, and it's great you asked that because I think about it not just from a U.S. perspective. I sit in global media, so we operate over more than 20 countries, and so when we think about that, we got to think about a framework that can scale and also that is localized enough too, right? I'm thinking global, but also locally. And a lot of it has to do with technology. We were talking about this before a while ago where I actually think that, I've been in the industry for 15 years. So for me, like targeting at scale feels like that's relatively easy if you have the right tools in place, right? But excluding content that it doesn't sit with your company values is probably much harder to do at scale, right? Because there's more of that stuff cropping up. And so we really rely on technology to understand that context. And we do that in all of the countries there. So we're considering, the sentiment, not just the category. In fact, I think it was last year, gosh, a little longer than that. It's time. We were talking about time is a circle. It's a construct. Yeah. We were, working with y'all around, we know that the pandemic is here and it's something that we've never seen before. How do we think longer term, right? I think that a lot of marketers will start to ask, do I exclude myself from pandemic related content? Right? Do I just make this keyword list, put COVID-19 on it? No. You really have to think longer term, and especially as a brand that it's not just about cards for us. It's we truly believe in supporting our businesses and communities. We need to make sure that we are able to get the message out to support small businesses. And so when we actually talked about how do we integrate technology right in there, we wanted to make sure that we understood the sentiment, the state of mind, right? Like folks, the context before we go out and actually put a message out there about supporting small businesses, and that was really key to that.
Yeah, there was so much. I mean, I look back to April 2020. There was such a big, important conversation within the brand safety community and the advertising community in general about how to embrace quality journalism, right? So there was a point, I think the stat was about 30 to 40% of all new web content in April of 2020 had some relevance to coronavirus or COVID-19. And so if you were just blindly blocking all COVID content, not only were you not going to reach the people that you want to reach, your campaigns are not going to scale, you're actually penalizing the journalists and the publishers that are actually pulling out really important content. And so we talked a lot about being able to sift through the neutral and positive content, of which there was a lot, right? I think for here in New York, 7 o'clock every night, banging the pots, there's some really positive moments of first responders, people stepping up, first line, and reaching an audience in that environment has a really positive impact on the brand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also don't think of it as just positive impact on the brand too. I mean, just relevancy. There's been, I don't know about you, but there's so many different startups born out during the pandemic, right? Just people, I call it hacking their business, pivoting. We have value to provide, right, around that. A message to say, how can we learn from each other, provide the tools and resources. And imagine if we left all of that out, we would not be able then to provide those resources to other small businesses too. So that's why I think it's not even just about like the mood. I think it's like much bigger than that. And you really have to think about that as, customer at the center of everything when you're building these programs.
Let's flip a little bit, because you had mentioned about the global nature of your business, massive, operating in many countries. And it's probably easy within your community here in your greater New York area office, where people can organize around an idea and a topic. And this is our approach to make sure that we're embracing these conversations. But around the world, people's perspective is very different, and their impact, the way they're impacted against these issues is very different. So how did you scale consistently around the world with this philosophy and this message?
Yeah. Well, one thing for sure is that you can have a framework. The challenge is operationalizing that. And I have to say I'm thankful for IAS, but also thankful to our agency partners at who have been incredible support for this. We at Amex have established, I call it like a center of excellence that helps drive thought leadership, build a framework around our media responsibility principles, and as new platforms emerge, provide resources to our marketers about how to navigate the space. Because if you are in a business unit, or you're just again, even a small e-commerce business, you're in your day-to-day operations, sometimes it's just hard to take a step back, right, and have an external point of view. That's why you're here today too, right? To figure out how to navigate that. So we created a network with we call it an ambassador network, where they have local planning experts, people who specialize in social media, everything you name it. Everyone has a brand safety hat, if you will, but they are deployed locally, right? To partner with our local Amex people, so that one, we make sure that they're consistently implementing, but also just being a sounding board, right? Because one of the tough things is keeping up with this evolving space. And annually, we do conduct training to our colleagues around the globe And we've had your team even come out just to help explain, how does ad tech work? Because sometimes not everybody has that at the forefront of their mind. And it's a constant education process. And we've got the support of leadership too, to make it the core part of our agenda, to make sure that folks are educated.
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, one of the things that really helped was, in partnership with some of the folks from our team actually pulled examples of web content that would be considered neutral, would be considered positive. So when you have this tangible example of what this looks like, it makes it a little bit easier for your internal teams around the world to digest it and apply it, right?
Exactly, yeah. And again, because we have to think globally, we're taking examples from different countries, because context means differently in every country, and so we always have to think about how do we. Translation is not necessarily the direct word, but even for us, we're speaking English, but it's tech English. Come on, let's be honest with ourselves, or media English, or jargon. And pulling the jargon out and making it clear to understand, what do you need to do locally?
Yeah. We have a few minutes left. I want to switch to something a little bit more tactical. There's a lot of contextual solutions that are emerging in the space. For American Express specifically, how did you go about testing different solutions? And then an important question follow-up is, how do you determine whether or not a test was successful?
Yeah. Well, we're constantly testing. So sometimes it's okay, how do you take that step back? Well, one, when we're identifying a partner, we really need to make sure, one, it sticks to our core values of what we're trying to do, the principles of brand safety, what does it deliver on? And we set out a learning agenda together. And what we're really looking for when we're especially testing in the brand safety space in the end is, are we driving improvement in our ad verification metrics that include suitability, and compare that to not just the industry, but also to ourselves year on year. And we're very transparent about that to our leadership. And actually in the next, I call it the 102 training that's coming up internally, right? We've already educated on what tech is. We're going to start to talk about, okay, how do you use these metrics at your disposal to understand if what we're doing works? And then we put that accountability not just on ourselves, but on the local marketers to start evaluating that as well. So hopefully, we'll be able to have some really good stories coming out of that.
I hope so too. We'll wrap up here. So it's very clear, and we talked about it in the beginning, consumers are holding brands much more accountable to taking a stand, right? And corporate responsibility, I think, is more important now than ever. It's no surprise that you're growing with young people, because that group is even more focused on corporate responsibility. So as advertisers and brands shift in that direction, how can we, as an ad tech industry, work together to support that growth? And what can we all do to help?
Yeah, well, I think that transparency is going to be number one. Us as advertisers, we want that transparency from our publisher partners or ad tech partners, but our customers, again, thinking customer centrically, want that transparency as well. And so I think it's, as an industry, working together to really drive that transparency. The role of tech bridging the human side of everything together is going to be really important to innovate around that. I also think that, having a forum like this, or even one-on-one, to talk about the successes and the challenges, right, of that in a transparent fashion, I think is important too, because otherwise we're not going to move forward. Amex doesn't, I wouldn't say that we have it perfect. I like to say we do, and we're testing and learning all the time, and we need to be willing to do that. And I think creating standards as well. And I know that Garm is going to be chatting later today, and I think that they have been, incredible in helping move the industry forward in that respect, to just help try to drive some standards here.
Yeah, and the one thing that's been clear is companies like IAS and many others, we can build technology, we can build tools, but it's really the human interactions on how we partner and what we can build together and how we can think about moving this stuff forward. And so the partnership with American Express has been fantastic. We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us and telling the story. It's a really important one. Thank you to the 614 for having us.
Stay seated for a second.
Okay,
I have a question for you. Stay seated for a second before you. But of course. So I'm gonna ask you guys a question because we do have a global audience. I think you touched upon it. You know, this event is being simulcast. It's being live streamed, and it'll be in our portal, and people watch it from all over the world. So I have a question for both of you. How are some of the things you talked about different in other markets? You know, if you think about this idea of education and where the level of education is on some of these topics, like when you're thinking about Asia markets or you're thinking about European markets, is it different? Is it the same? Can you give us a little insight on the global?
Yeah, well, I can start on that one. And it is maybe not even the country. I think, you know, it's even within your own organization, right? Like different business units have different objectives, and then you layer the cultural context onto that. You know, what I see sometimes different is, for example, how we view news, right? And here, you know, in the when I say here in the U.S., right, news is not just breaking news and tragedy. We've got, you know, the kind of like the softer side of news, right? Good news, if you will. We have, you know, arts and leisure, food, like all of that lifestyle blended in. Not every country's like news source is going to be the same way like that, right? Like politics might be just the dominant piece. And so we have to think, you know, okay, we can't eliminate all of these hard things, right? Like we have to be able to hear from our local markets, what is the role that plays. Same thing from an ad tech perspective, right? We do recognize that privacy is different from country to country. So sometimes implementing ad technology is not the easiest. And also just, we all have different KPIs at the end of the day, right? So being able to really, you know, as a change agent, explain, you know, it's not just about ROI across countries, but like what are the longer term outcomes of just doing it right? And you know, sometimes we nail it, and sometimes it takes a little, you know, it takes more than just a training session to have that conversation, right? So we rely on our network, our ambassador network, to do that a lot.
Got a chance. How do you think about global?
Yeah, so we're a global business, and a large portion of our business actually comes from outside of the U.S. And here in the United States, it would be crazy for an advertiser to run without some form of verification, right? Brand safety at the very minimum. But when we enter markets in LATAM, and Indonesia, Southeast Asia, actually brand safety is not even a concern. They have so many other concerns. And so bringing suitability to them and the complexity that comes along with that, it's never going to fly. And so in mature markets like the US and the UK, it's very much pushing the suitability framework, making sure advertisers have the tools to get really creative. But we also have an obligation in some of those newer markets, emerging markets, to educate, just to make sure that they understand what the risk is. They understand the downstream impacts. They understand the potential for a better experience with the customer. And the one thing we always have to prove, and we're really focused on this, is just driving performance, right? We don't want verification, brand safety, suitability specifically to be seen as a cost. It's an investment. And if done correctly, it'll actually drive a very strong return on that investment. And I think that's our responsibility, along with the global brands and the global agencies that we work with.
Thank you. That's an important place to end. Driving ROI and outcome is, you know, where we get to. So thank you both.
Yeah,
great job.
Thank you for having us.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.